I love this time of year where the draft is just around the corner, we have free agency about to open shortly after that, and when it comes to all the trade buzz and rumors going on throughout the league, and of course, because of how critical this offseason is for the Chicago Bulls and the future of their franchise, they are no exception in being included in these trade rumors leading up to the draft. So much so that we got a recent report from Bulls insider Casey Johnson in his latest column, which I'll leave linked in the description, that the Bulls have floated as many as 15 proposals centered around Zach Lavine to various teams, including the Sacramento Kings, Orlando Magic, Jazz, and the Philadelphia 76ers. And while yes, this is good to hear because it means the Bulls are trading Zach Lavine seriously and are holding to their commitment to enact change that AK mentioned at the end of his season press conference in April. At the same time, though, it does come off a little desperate when you're just throwing out everything to a bunch of teams and seeing what sticks. Like, if executives around the league know you're throwing out a bunch of proposals centered around Zach, probably an indication that you're doing everything you can to remain under the luxury tax, because as we've said so many times before, there is no scenario in which the Bulls could possibly hold on to Zach Lavine while also re-signing DeMar and Patrick Williams and keeping Lonzo Ball on the books. Even if they sign DeMar and Patrick to relatively team-friendly deals, keeping Zach's contract on their books puts them over the luxury tax, which we know they cannot do. Ownership won't sign off on that. So the Bulls are desperate, but in a way I don't really mind, because it's forcing them to be aggressive and actually doing something this offseason than just signing some vet minimum players. It's forcing the Bulls to get creative and actually enacting change. That said, until change happens, I'm not going to hold my breath, but if this report is true, the Bulls are in fact doing what they can to shake up the roster. And so in this video, let's talk about what this means and exploring what some of these potential 15 trade proposals would look like, focusing specifically on the teams Casey called out in his column. So what's going on, everyone? You're listening to Bulls Central here. Hope you're all doing well. Now, it's no secret that the Bulls and their number one priority going into this offseason is trading Zach Lavine. Multiple Bulls insiders, beat writers have confirmed this. Obviously, it was no secret that the Bulls were trying to trade him dating all the way back to last season, with both sides looking to find a new home for him, so none of this should come as a surprise. And it really shouldn't be surprised when you see a number like 15 trade proposals being floated around, as the Bulls should really be exploring any and all options. I will say though that between the 4 teams KC called out in this column, 2 stand out to me as being more intriguing: the Sixers and the Magic, primarily because those teams have the most cap space. Enough cap space where they can absorb Zach's contract in a trade where the Bulls wouldn't have to take back any salary in return. Now, I don't think either of those teams would agree to that, because they likely would want to send out some money so it gives them enough cap space to sign other free agents this summer. But for the Sixers, who are flush with cap space, although that's as it currently stands, because as of right now, Tyrese Maxey is a restricted free agent. We all know full well they're going to re-sign him, likely to a max extension. But for the Sixers, you're talking about a team that could use some added scoring to pair alongside Joel Embiid and Tyrese Maxey, especially considering they're likely going to part ways with Tobias Harris and let him walk. They're also a team that is looking to win now, while they still have Embiid in his prime and a rising star in Maxey. I still think the Sixers' priority is to get Paul George, but if PG ends up re-signing with the Clippers or goes to some other team, if he declines his player option, I could see the Sixers pursuing Zach Lavine as a backup option for them to add talent this summer. Now, what would a trade look like for the Sixers? Of course, you have to keep in mind that as it currently stands, Zach's trade value still remains low. Most have said that the market for Zach is very little to non-existent, in large part because of his contract and 3 years still remaining on his deal, combined with his recent injury that kept him out for most of the season. So I don't think we should expect some crazy return for Zach Lavine. But as I've said before, in a scenario like this where the Bulls can trade with a team that has ample cap space, and the Bulls are able to move him to a team without having to attach additional assets to a deal, like a future pick or even an Alex Caruso, and the Bulls also don't have to take on a bad contract in return, that right there is a big win for the Bulls, in my opinion, because it means you finally end this divorce with Zach Lavine. It gives you so much more flexibility from a cap perspective, not only in the short term, but in the long term as well. Obviously, something has to be exchanged in a trade for Zach, though. It can't be a situation where you just throw him to a team and say, here you go, just take him, no need to give us anything in return. It doesn't work that way. At a minimum, the Bulls would need to receive a second-round pick, for an example, or a lower-level role player in return. But when it comes to the Sixers, the reason this one is particularly pretty interesting is because you could see a scenario in which the Bulls could acquire Buddy Hield in the form of a sign and trade, which I've said before, I would like Hield on the Bulls. Again, assuming the angle is to try and keep winning now. But Buddy Hield gives the Bulls the shooting that they would need coming off the bench, and you likely can get him for cheap. Yeah, maybe you could do a sign and trade of some kind to add Tobias Harris, although I'm not as interested in Harris as some might be, even though the Bulls could use his size. But the other thing is the Sixers, they also have a lot of picks. Not sure they would give up a first-round pick for Zach, but maybe a couple seconds, which is never a bad thing, considering the Bulls don't have many second-round picks to work with, either to use in future drafts or in packaging those picks in a trade deal. So I can see this working, and I believe I said before when discussing trade options for Zach Lavine in a video a few weeks back that the most realistic team I could see Lavine being moved to was the Philadelphia 76ers, as it would be the best fit, and they have the cap space to make a deal work. For the Orlando Magic, I don't see why the Magic would be as interested in someone like Zach Lavine compared to the Sixers. The Magic absolutely need scoring. They need shooting in general, and Zach would instantly fill that void. But he doesn't really fit their timeline. He doesn't really fit what they're trying to build. If they really want to add shooting, they could likely add someone like a Malik Monk on a cheaper deal. I just don't see the Magic wanting to fill up their available cap space with Zach Lavine, especially knowing they're going to have to shell out big contracts to Paolo Banchero, Franz Wagner, and Jalen Suggs in the next 1 to 2 years. I also don't know what the Magic would offer the Bulls in return that the Bulls would actually like. They're not going to shell out picks. They're not going to trade their main core guys. I'm not interested in Markelle Fultz or Jonathan Isaac. Keep your injury-prone players away from my team, please. Cole Anthony, no thanks. Inconsistent player on offense. Again, I can see why the Bulls and Magic would be pursuing a deal that included Zach Lavine because they need more offense and they have the cap space that would help the Bulls out in taking back less salary in a trade, but I just don't see the Magic pursuing this as much as the Bulls would like. Now, the Utah Jazz one is interesting because for all intents and purposes, the Jazz are still rebuilding. They have a treasure trove of picks they got in the Rudy Gobert and Donovan Mitchell trades. They're still building out their roster and aren't quite close yet to competing. Adding Zach Lavine, I'm just not sure if I see the fit there. I don't really see how that elevates the Jazz both in the short and long term. Maybe the Jazz are just looking to get off John Collins' deal, but that's not going to interest the Chicago Bulls. If they have to take on John Collins' contract, maybe Jordan Clarkson, as Clarkson hasn't fit their timeline for a while now. The Jazz have cap space, but not enough to take on Lavine's contract without sending some players in return. Yeah, I don't know. I don't really see this one because the Jazz aren't going to give up future assets for Zach Lavine when they're still trying to build out this team now. The Kings, though, this one I could see. We know the Kings have shown interest in Lavine in the past, dating all the way back to when Lavine was a restricted free agent and the Kings gave him an offer sheet that the Bulls later on would go on to match. This was back in 2018. Lavine has been linked to the Kings in various trade rumors as of late, and the reason I see this one working more so than, say, the Magic or the Jazz is because the Kings are likely going to be one of those desperate teams this summer that is going to look for a win-now piece, a player they believe will put them back into contention from where they were just a couple of seasons ago when they made the playoffs and finished third in the Western Conference. And I also believe the Kings will lose Malik Monk in free agency, which is going to be a big loss for them for his athleticism and shooting. And a player like Zach Lavine could fill that void and be that guy to replace Monk. Much more expensive, but I think the Kings would take that gamble because they know their time to win is now, with De'Aaron Fox and Sabonis in their primes. Adding another star like Lavine could make them think it'll get them to contention. Now, the recent rumors about what a trade would look like with the Kings for the Bulls have included Harrison Barnes and Kevin Huerter for Zach Lavine, which to that I say hell no. Don't get me wrong, the Bulls could use Barnes at his size, they could use Huerter's shooting, but bringing in both of those guys, who are making close to $35 million combined, doesn't do the Bulls much good as it relates to their cap if the goal is to have more flexibility in staying under the tax. And of course, you also have to remember Huerter is coming off a pretty bad season, also an injury. Barnes is declining as a player and is already 32. Now, if the package is just these two guys, then the Kings need to throw in a pick. Maybe a package deal around some of their younger players where the Bulls can take back less salary and some future assets to work with in return. And like I mentioned, I could see the Kings being much more agreeable to give the Bulls what they want because of how desperate they are to compete now. It's going to make for an interesting next couple of weeks between the draft and free agency, that's for sure. There is likely going to be a lot of movement throughout the league. It's why I love this time of year. So let me know what you guys think about some of these reports. Let me know in the comments. As always, be sure to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.